Hello and welcome to another episode of the Q49 Podcast, brought to you exclusively by the Hoosier Network, alongside my co-beat reporters Joe Cronin and Nick Rodecap. I am Austin Platt. We are recording here in our beautiful Franklin Hall studios with cameras installed for the very first time. Of course, you've been listening on Spotify. Nothing changes, but if you're watching here on YouTube, welcome. We're here to recap Indiana's first two games of 2023, consisting of a draw to Notre Dame a week ago, and then in the home opener on Tuesday, a 2-0 win against DePaul. Fellas, let's start. Let's go chronologically. First off, how we doing? Happy Friday. We've made it to Labor Day weekend.
Oh, yeah. We're 2 weeks into the school year, Labor Day weekend. I don't have classes on Friday, so it's been good. Other than the fact that the Bloomington parking scheme is pretty horrific this morning, it's been a solid day.
It's rough.
Yeah, seriously. No Friday classes. It's basically a 4-day weekend. The weather's actually livable. Feeling good.
Yeah, last week it was pretty hot. It was 100 degrees. It was rough for Thursday. I know you were there, Joe, for Notre Dame. It was a hot one, and the teams, as we know, play very close every single year. That did not change. It finished in a 1-1 draw. I will say, if you listen to the first episode on Spotify, it was Sam Brunsman and I predicted a 1-1 draw, so, I'll just tap myself on the back. Last year, I was terrible. I was
Genie
awful.
in a bottle.
Some would say. So I was awful at predicting scores. So we do this on every podcast. We'll do it today as Indiana prepares for two home matches in the IU Credit Union Classic to bookend this Labor Day weekend. But let's start with that match against Notre Dame. Joe, you were the only one of us there, so I guess you win the gold star for 100% participation to this point.
There we go.
Your reactions on the match, of course, Indiana outplayed Notre Dame specifically in the first half, but fell behind, got an equalizer pretty quickly, and in the second half, it was kind of back and forth, and even Notre Dame had some chances to win at the end. Give me your overall evaluations.
Oh, yeah, I might work just start with that last 5 minutes of action. That's where it looked like the Hoosiers were collapsing a little bit, like they started to get fatigued. Saw Coach Yeagley, he pulled out Hugo Bacharach for that last, I think it was 12 to 15 minutes, which that was surprising to me because he was having a phenomenal game, and through two games, like we'll get to his performance throughout but he is very stout. I think he's going to be one of the top defenders in all the Big Ten. But with that, there were some gaps in the defense. There's new players. Alex Barger's playing his first ever game. He has been very solid, too, as a freshman especially. And in the midfield, it just seemed like they were struggling. Notre Dame was knocking on that door. I think they had 4 or 5 shots to close out the game, a couple corner kicks and free kicks. It was chippy towards the end. Tensions were high. It was very hot. There were water breaks in this game. I imagine as the season goes along, those are going to kind of dwindle away as the heat goes down. But at the start of the game, the team just struggled in the midfield a little bit. You saw some of the talent with Collins Adu. You could see the wicked pace that he has, but it just seems like they haven't been able to possess a lot in the midfield.
Nick?
Yeah, I want to go back to that last probably 2 minutes of that match against Notre Dame. It ended in a 1-1 draw, but it seems like Notre Dame probably should have won that match. I was watching the game while studio hosting for WIUX, and it felt like Notre Dame was going to score. They had a perfect chance, and if it wasn't for Indiana's defense, they had a wide open net. Then they had the corner kick at the end. They sent a header just, I think, wide and high to the right. And it just seemed like Indiana was fortunate to get out of there. Of course, Notre Dame's a very good team. They've always played Indiana close. For them to get out with a draw, I think, was very fortunate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say the fact that it felt like in the first half, it felt cruel that the match was tied. It was level at the break, considering how well Indiana played. Of course, they went behind on a kind of an awkward free kick where JT Harms came out, couldn't get anything on it, and Patty Burns kind of knocked one in. I know he hit the post a few times last year, and then Aduro got the equalizer on a 1v1 that he just snuck within the post and underneath the arms. The first half and the second half differential, Joe, was pretty drastic.
Well, I do want to talk about that goal that Notre Dame had because it was that, I don't know, it's been kind of a consistent trend with JT Harms. He's very solid. His communication is pretty impeccable. He keeps the two center backs in line very well. He did it last year. He's been doing it throughout this season. But he's so aggressive off his line. And there are a few scares. It would just be a drop ball where one of the Notre Dame strikers, whether it was Russo or Rue, they'd be running. And it was close. It was pretty much a game of inches with him getting the ball away, and especially when he ran out on that free kick. Had he stayed on his line about the 6-yard box, I don't know. I think he makes that save.
Yeah, it seems pretty obvious. Nick, you kind of said it well, and I was curious because I was I'm always thinking about this. Of course, recency bias would tell us that Indiana was the one that's fortunate to come away with a result there. But in the first half and maybe in the start of the second half, it felt like Indiana was outplaying Notre Dame and the scoreline didn't feel fair. So I wish we had like the XG philosophy. I wish we had expected goals in college soccer. That would be pretty cool. But I like what you said with the fact that maybe it was Indiana the ones that should have been fortunate to come away with the result, and maybe that changed the mindset going into Tuesday. I'm curious your thoughts on that, Nick.
Yeah, I think going into DePaul, it definitely must have felt like for Indiana that there was something that was kind of left unfulfilled. And of course, the conditions were extremely hot, and everybody's, I think a little bit frustrated by just the heat and you're gassed by the end of the match, to be honest. And thinking in terms of moving forward, Coach Yeagley was very adamant that it was a very difficult match up in South Bend. So I think for them to get back home and to defeat DePaul in such convincing fashion, I think it's a big step forward from what it kind of felt like almost, I think, in a few ways, it did kind of feel like a loss up in South Bend, even though the scoreline was even.
They outshot Notre Dame 17-9, 5-2 in shots on goal. We're, I guess, out-cornered is the term I'm going to use. 7-3. The Irish had 4 more corners, but the goal from Collins Aduro, the nice assist from Sam Sarver, we've seen those two link up quite nicely. So that finishes a 1-1 draw. It actually dropped Indiana in the rankings from 2 to 10. And the United Soccer Coaches poll that actually dropped on Tuesday right before the match against DePaul. I'm not sure if anyone got to see that other than us, of course, but maybe it had some effect on the way Indiana played against DePaul on Tuesday in the home opener at Bill Armstrong Stadium. A fantastic crowd. And, boy, it's one of those games where if you look at just the box score, your eyes, I think, your jaw would be on the floor just considering the scoreline. 2-0 Indiana wins, both goals in the second half, but shots were 31-1. Indiana had 15 shots to 0, I believe, at the end of the first half. We were all just shaking our heads at halftime and wondering, how is this match not 3 or 4-0? That's kind of the way all of us thought about it. But it was interesting. The team was so confident when we listened afterwards that they were going to win that match. And that's something I was pretty surprised with. I'm curious to see if you guys kind of agreed, or if you were in that locker room, would you be as confident or maybe frustrated, Joe?
Oh, yeah, especially when they had 15 shots after the first half, 31 to end the game, like you mentioned. With only 9 on goal, I think it was the thing. It was like, well, guys, we're getting the shots. We just got to, focus. And that was something that Coach Yeagley said in the post-game press conference, was how they were playing a little bit selfish, just kind of ripping them when they wanted to. They had space, but once they started using their creativity, we'll go to Sam Sarver. He had a pretty phenomenal game out on the wing. He was working and cutting back and making a ton of plays all game long, but they had the shots. At some point, they're going to fall, and you saw it with Collins Aduro's head, and then Quentin Helmer, what a shot he had.
Unbelievable, Nick. I know you're on the call again for IUX. You're kind of you're playing two sides here, trying to write for us and broadcast. The Swiss Army knife, of course. But what were your thoughts, considering you were on the call with our very own Sam Brunsman?
Yeah, I think Indiana dominated that game possession-wise. We don't have the exact numbers, but it was probably somewhere in the neighborhood of Indiana in possession about 80% of the time in that match. It just seemed like they could play keep away from DePaul in that middle third. And the finishing in the first half, like we mentioned, it wasn't really up to par. There were some shots that just were non-competitive, like Hail Mary type shots that just ended up nowhere close. There were other shots where the DePaul keeper, Gandhi Cruz, made phenomenal saves. He had 7 saves in this match. DePaul's defense was okay once they were kind of backed against the wall. But again, you play the numbers game, you get shot after shot after shot, and eventually you're going to break through. And on the other end as well, Hugo Bacharach and Joey Mayer in the middle in that defense were rock solid.
And they kind of had to be, knowing that Indiana continued to push up. They had both their fullbacks really play up, and it felt like there were 8 players for Indiana in the final third at most times. And the Hoosiers eventually got the breakthrough. And Collins Aduro header, another great pass from Sam Sarver, who we heard after the match said, "Hey, Collins, I'll get you another one as long as you're there and you finish it." That was kind of the issue. It was, could it happen? And once they got the first, you figured a second one was going to come. Quentin Helmer got the ball on the right side of the 18 and a beauty on his left foot into the top corner. And that was more or less all she wrote. 31-1 it finished in shots, 9-1 shots on goal. I'm going to take you guys back to a match. I don't know if this is in your brain, considering you weren't on campus yet, but my freshman year, the Big Ten championship at Penn State, it was a snowy, really ugly day, and Indiana outplayed Penn State in the first half, but couldn't get a goal, and then the second half they conceded, I want to say 2 or 3 times, ended up losing that match on the road, and that was one where you listened afterwards, and Todd Yeagley said, I was worried about the team, considering we outplayed the opponent in the first half, but couldn't get anything, and then you could tell the locker room, maybe tensions were starting to rise a little bit, and eventually they just couldn't play the same in the second half. But it was much different in this one. The confidence from all these guys was there, and they knew one was going to come, which I think just shows maybe the quality of the opponent. But as we've talked about, DePaul in the Big East, not a conference or a team to slouch about, considering now they have 12 teams. They just added Akron, who's now in the top 10 of the latest polls. So this was a really important win, considering if you look at the rest of the non-con teams before conference play starts on September 15th, DePaul, I guess, maybe would you guys say was the weakest team maybe on paper? I'm curious.
I mean, yes, on paper, it's the weakest team throughout the first couple games that Indiana's going to be playing, but it's still a good game that they played, a good team that they played. The Big East, once again, is a good conference, and Indiana's going to see some other Big East teams. They see Butler in mid-September, so they're going to get that competitive play. I think their non-conference schedule is great this year.
Yeah, as it always is.
The game against Notre Dame on the road, that's a good game. When they host Washington, that's going to be huge. That's a massive game. When they go to Kentucky, that might be one of the biggest non-conference games of the year. I mean, this team knows how to schedule non-conference games, and, you're going to have, not every single one can be the top of the top, but I think having DePaul as your baseline is, that's very solid.
Absolutely. It kind of puts everything else into perspective. Nick, anything else?
Yeah, when you look at it, and it's the same with other sports as well, iron sharpens iron. You're not going to really be productive. You're not going to get better by playing subpar competition. You want to go into Big Ten play knowing that you face the best of the best outside your conference, and then you head into conference play with maybe some resume wins, some draws that were really hard fought. And again, that's what you see with Notre Dame. You mentioned the Washington match is going to be huge, especially in front of the home crowd. Indiana goes to Lexington, and there's always a kind of rivalry with Kentucky. It's some really good competition, and going into Big Ten play, if you can steal a couple matches from there, prove that you can hang, as Indiana so often does, they're going to be in good shape.
Joe?
I mean, especially the fact that there's a couple Big Ten teams that are in the poll, Maryland and Penn State. They're both in the 20s right now, but once Big Ten play starts, there's going to be even more competition. And we haven't even talked about South Florida. They were receiving votes for this latest poll. That's another great, and that's on the road. That's going to be, that could be a trap loss for Indiana. Indiana might be favored just because of their ranking, but, you got to go to Tampa Bay to play a game. That's going to be tough.
Yeah, of course, that's the next Friday, a week from now. But, of course, Hoosiers focus right now on this weekend. So I guess through the first 2 games, is there one thing you guys have really liked and something maybe you want to see improve? Is there it's a one strength and a one weakness? It's only been 2 games. It's not a huge sample size, but considering the shots total for Indiana in that department, it seems like they've been the better side and maybe deserve more than a win and a draw. But I'm curious, Nick, maybe something you like and you don't like.
There's one person I like in particular. His name is Colin Zaduro.
Wow.
Okay.
He was making waves from the first preseason match, and now that we've got a couple games to watch him, of course, he scored both of Indiana's goals this season. He's been fantastic. He's quick, he's nimble, he's crafty with his finishing. He attracts defenders, and that does a couple things. One, it shows how good he is, but also it frees up the players around him. Tommy Mahalik, Sam Sarver, and of course Malun Gumbali also up front. You got Patrick McDonald who can come up as well. I think Oduro is really a fantastic puzzle piece, and he just fills out the Indiana attack. Coach Yeagley's described him as one of the better freshmen he's ever coached. He's just been phenomenal. Now on the flip side, I think you look at a weakness perhaps, maybe shot selection. Again, 31 shots against DePaul, only 9 were on goal. And I think if you're Coach Yeagley, you want to see more like selective shooting. You don't want to just, send one in and have it go a billion feet over the crossbar. You want to make sure you're making the keeper at least think about it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think with Collins Oduro, he has all the talent in the world. And I think in that Notre Dame game, it was the first time he's playing collegiate soccer, especially as a freshman. He's from Ghana. I mean, he was phenomenal when he was at the Phelps School over in Pennsylvania. But it's a big step up. And this is something that I think a lot of the veterans on this team understand is everyone was the dog at their high school or wherever they came from, their academy. And now they're all pooled together and they have to fit in their role. I think Oduro's still trying to find his role. You can tell that he can score goals. We've seen that in both games already. But when he has the ball on his foot, I think he's a little out of control. I mean, he's trying to get the pace of the play with his abilities. And I think once he figures that out, this is going to be a player to watch out for.
I think something that we haven't mentioned yet, of course, the Indiana loves to rely on the wing. That's something they've done a lot in recent years. And, of course, they lost Wittenbrink and Enderle both to the MLS Super Draft. But as they feel like they've replaced those guys pretty well. We've seen Mahalik out there on the left. They'll throw Maloon out on the right or really anyone else. But the middle, the center midfield, which Jack Wagner and Patrick McDonald, having played an entire season together, it feels like they haven't been able to utilize them enough. And we've seen sometimes where if the ball comes back to, let's say, Harms and Bacharach, who are kind of the two center backs playing there, they'll just send it all the way forward and maybe not create the chance that you want. But usually with the speed on the wings, you can just send it anywhere, and Sarver's going to catch up to it, Mahalik's going to get onto it, and that's something we've seen a little bit that Indiana utilized that maybe I want to see this team built from the back, which is something we've usually seen under head coach Todd Yeagley.
Yeah, it just seems like they're playing a little bit of boot and run right now. I mean, you utilize the speed when you have it. Collins Vidura, wicked fast. Sam Sarver, especially with the ball, is so fast. And that's a guy I think right now has been the team MVP. Obviously, Collins getting the goals, but Sarver just as that leader, his ability to create in a situation where Wittenbrink's gone, Enderle's gone, he's really stepping up his junior year. And I think in the situation where Sarver and Mahalik are now the juniors, they're upperclassmen, Sarver has been the one to step up. And in the midfield, the center mids, there needs to be more touches. That's where you're going to be able to create more chances to get better shots, because a lot of the times it's Sarver and Mahalik crossing it in. It's hard to get your head on a ball, especially clean or volley in itself. But to work the midfield is something that this team needs to see more. And saw it a little bit with Quentin Helmer off the bench. And I think as he becomes more healthy throughout the season, he's battling that injury during the offseason last season, he could be someone that maybe works his way into the starting rotation. Not going to say anything, but he really played well in that game against DePaul.
That shot was really top-notch, Nick.
Yeah, Helmer had, I said this on the broadcast, he was only in the match for about 14 minutes, but that goal really felt like it put the match out of reach. He said he was feeling good. He let it rip, and, that's okay because you're coming in off the bench, you're kind of pumped up, and it went in the back of the net. It was almost a perfect shot. And with Helmer, you mentioned he's still getting healthy. You mentioned a couple injuries he was recovering from. I think if he gets his fitness back, he can be another depth piece for Indiana, because we saw Carson Henderlong come in. We saw Tommy Mahalik kind of coming in and out because he's better, I think, off the bench in the second half. If Helmer can get healthy, then that's going to give Indiana another option in the midfield if perhaps they're not clicking with a particular group of guys on a particular day.
And it's obviously a big win for Indiana confidence-wise. Last year, of course, in the home opener, Indiana fell to a draw against Portland despite outshooting them. It was kind of a similar situation to what we saw on Tuesday, only the result is different. And the important thing, of course, Indiana keeps a clean sheet, just one shot. So a draw and a win so far for Indiana. The United Soccer Coaches poll still dropped them, which felt a bit harsh, but hey, preseason rankings are preseason rankings for a reason. And as Mike Woodson always said, you got to play the games, and rankings are nice, but of course, you got to play the games in order to see what happens. So, 2 games gone, now 2 games on the horizon this weekend in the annual IU Credit Union Classic. The big one is tonight, Friday, under the lights at Bill Armstrong at 8 p.m. kick as Indiana takes on Washington, the 22nd ranked team, a team that's been bouncing around in the standings. But so far this year, the Huskies, who of course, as we know, 2 years ago knocked out the Hoosiers in the Sweet 16 of the NCAA tournament, 3-2 in extra time in a thriller. They beat South Florida 2-0, a team we've been talking about that Indiana will see in a week from now. That was their opening match, and they lost at home to San Diego 2-0. The last 2 years, Washington has been the second national seed in the NCAA tournament. They made it to the College Cup 2 years ago. Last year, they lost to Creighton at home in the Sweet 16. So, guys, this is basically the premier match I think everyone had circled on the schedule. Big Ten Network, it's a national broadcast tonight. Nick, I'll start with you. What are you looking for? And, of course, it's interesting. Sam Sarver mentioned in his post-game presser on Tuesday that he was interested because he's someone that really thinks this is a game he's had in his mind for a while, ever since he got knocked out, and he wants to really turn the tide.
I'm expecting this to be a very physical match. There's a lot on the line. You mentioned it's a nationally televised match. These are 2 teams that are going to be conference rivals in the future.
Yeah.
Which still feels a little bit odd to say. But Indiana, I feel like some of those guys like Sarver, some of those guys who were there in 2021 when Washington knocked Indiana out of the NCAA tournament are going to have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder. Now, by that same token, Coach Yeagley said that isn't really something that he likes to do. He doesn't like to look in the rearview mirror. I think he's going to game plan as if, it's a completely clean slate, because for all intents and purposes, it is. But because of the big atmosphere, it's a Friday night in Bloomington. Football season starts the very next day. There's going to be a lot of fans there. It's probably going to be very physical, kind of like the Louisville exhibition that we saw. And of course, it'll be very, very close.
Oh, yeah. This is going to be probably the biggest home game of the year. I'd put a pin on it possibly. There could be another one down the line, but it's dance marathon night. Yep. It's Friday night. Yeah, obviously the crowd was great on Tuesday, but it's a Friday night. Football season starting tomorrow. There is going to be high energy, and I think everyone on that team, coaching staff included, knows that. There's going to be high emotions from some of the players who, like you said, Nick, saw Washington a couple years ago. And I think Coach Yeagley did a really good job in his presser understanding that don't look in the rearview mirror. Like, just play it as a game. And I think with someone like Sarver who has some emotions going into this, it's good to have a little bit of fuel. But once that whistle blows, he has to put that to his side a bit and play his game rather than getting too physical. Saw it a couple times with, any sort of player. When they get their emotions involved, that's when mistakes happen and you possibly even get yourself out of the game.
It's very easy for Yeagley to look in the rearview mirror, considering how much he's been around the block. And, of course, the rearview mirror for him lately has not been too nice. He's been looking, of course, a lot of big-time losses in the last few years. But, of course, he hopes that changes this season. We do score predictions every time. We'll do one for tonight, and then, of course, tonight, $5 night. If you're listening, watching to this today when I post this sometime in the afternoon, if you have an Ohio State ticket, you bring it, you get $5 off, and it's just $5 entry. Of course, all the students get in for free. It will certainly be a game of fireworks, you would imagine. Score predictions. I'll start. All right. I'll be selfish since I got the last one right. The game 2 years ago, I think, really is resonating in a lot of these guys' mind. And I know it was 2 years ago, so half the team wasn't even on campus or wasn't even a Hoosier officially at that point. It's early in the season. Indiana struggled in some of these big matches in the beginning of years lately. I think that changes tonight, and I will say they lost 3-2 2 years ago. I say that reverses. I say they win 3-2. I think it's a high-scoring game. Both offenses will be on display, and I think both teams are just going to be so ready to get at it, considering what both teams last played on. Well, actually, Washington last played on Sunday. Indiana last played Tuesday, so plenty of time for these teams to think about it. I'll go with 3-2 Indiana win. Aduro scores twice. I'll give one to Mahalik, and I think the Hoosiers win 3-2. I think it's a back-and-forth game.
Collins on a heater.
Collins will officially, I think the Bloomington Fire Department need to be on watch, considering the way he's been playing lately. Guys, and I've just set the bar pretty high. I've gone with an explosive game. What do you guys think?
I kind of like the 3-2 pick. You almost took it right from me, but I'll change it up just for the sake of the podcast.
Good.
I think it's going to be high-powered. Both offenses are going to come in hot. I mean, Washington has seen two very different games. They won 2-0 against South Florida and then lost 2-0 to San Diego, both at home. Very confusing start of the season for them, but they have some fire under them. Indiana's got some fire under them. It's going to be high-scoring. I'm seeing a 2-2 draw.
Okay.
These are two good teams. Indiana has a tendency in those late moments to not be able to finish. Saw it a lot last year, especially with that new overtime rule. And I think when it matters the most, they won't be able to get the job done. It's going to end in a 2-2 draw.
3-2 and 2-2. Nick, what do you got?
I've got to flip the script. I think it is still going to be chippy. I think both offenses are going to be very aggressive, but I also think that the defenses will rise to the occasion. And I think I'm going to go with probably a 1-0 ledger in favor of Indiana. And the reason I say that is simply because the home crowd, the home atmosphere, Washington having to travel across the country, they are very well rested. But at the same time, I think it is a very big ask for any team to go into Bill Armstrong Stadium. The student section, if Tuesday is any indication, at least in person, is ruthless. And I think that's going to be the difference in this game. Indiana feeds off that crowd, scores, I think, kind of in the second half like we saw against DePaul, and that's the only goal of the match. Not going to say who scores it, because I don't want to be wrong, quite frankly.
There is something pretty just magical about that Indiana student section. They're right in your face. It gives a vibe. This might be a reach, but it's like Cameron Indoor Duke basketball. I mean, They are right there. When you're on that sideline as a player, you don't want to be a player on that sideline, pretty much.
I'll say one thing, and I'm glad you brought this up, Nick. We've seen teams in the past, if you can break down Indiana and slow them down by being aggressive and committing fouls, of course. We saw a red card issued in that DePaul match. There were 2 yellow cards total in the match. Of course, just one guy happened to get them both, and he got sent off. Unfortunate for him that the cookie had to crumble that way. But if a team is able to slow Indiana down, and maybe, I don't want to say get in their heads, but we saw Portland last year really frustrated them by just the stop and start action. Indiana couldn't get into a rhythm. That's something I think a lot of teams will notice that this year, and if they can do that safely, of course, while keeping everyone on the pitch, I think that can slow Indiana down. They're so much quicker, even compared to last year. Wittenbrink was so good on the wing. He wasn't as speedy. He was just so good with that right foot of his. But now this year, Indiana is so much quicker. I think if teams slow them down, that's where I think we might see some lower scoring matches. So I'm going to still stick with 3-2, but I do kind of like the way you were thinking. Joe, what do you got?
I agree with the way you think about trying to slow the game down. And in the championship back in December, and the first game of the season, we saw Syracuse and Notre Dame commit over 15 fouls on the Hoosiers. And it was a loss for Indiana and a tie for Indiana. You see a trend. It's going to be chippy. The way to stop them is to be very physical. And, as if you're smart enough with it to avoid yellows and reds, then you're going to be able to slow this team down and not harm your team that much.
Right, and you look at even the Louisville exhibition match from this year, that was 1-0. It felt really, really close because Louisville fouled, I think, over 30 times. It was, but it might not have been 30 times. I think it was closer to like 25. It felt like a billion. But the point is that teams, if they play super physically, I think you're right, they do absolutely frustrate Indiana. Especially, I think Sam Sarver's a guy who always plays really kind of aggressive and with a chip on his shoulder. But if he's constantly hitting the turf, I think it sometimes can kind of take him out of his rhythm a little bit.
I agree with that.
I love that. Yeah.
Saw it a little bit against Notre Dame. He was falling to the ground a lot, getting frustrated, and started to work a little, maybe selfishly, on his wing to try and just force shots. But a big thing with the fouling for Indiana is, saw this against Notre Dame. They would take their time to set up a set piece. I think changing the script a little bit and utilizing their pace when they get fouled to go. Catch that defense off guard. The defense is going to try to set up in the stoppage of play. If you just go within 5 seconds, you're right back to where you started. And they haven't showcased that yet when they do get fouled, and I think that would be something to possibly utilize that could boost their offense a little bit when they do get fouled.
Should be quite the interesting match. Friday night, if you got nothing else to do, go to the Bill, watch it on the Big Ten Network. It's going to be one of Indiana's biggest games, and I agree with you. I think it's their biggest home match of the season. You have Maryland and Penn State on the road this year. Kentucky's on the road. There's really no other team that's going to be even this close, I think, ranking-wise. Of course, Washington picked 6th in the preseason, have dropped a little bit, but still going to be a great match. Of course, then Saturday we got the football game. Sunday, I guess we'll have some time to rest. And then Monday, another match comes around. Seton Hall in the second half of the IU Credit Union Classic. They actually play Ohio State this afternoon in Bloomington at Bill Armstrong. I guess that's the appetizer, I guess one could say, to the entree tonight. But Seton Hall last year, another team that made it to the College Cup. We talk about the Big East all the time. Lost to Syracuse. That was also 3-2. That was a match that were very close, and Syracuse scored the game winner, I want to say, in the final 10 minutes or so before Indiana took the pitch against Pitt. And so far, Creighton this season, they have 2 wins under their name. They beat Rider 1-0 at home in their opener. Then they beat Air Force 3-0. So, obviously this is going to be these next 2 matches for them are going to be much bigger. Tonight at 5 o'clock against Ohio State, and then 8 o'clock, another one, Labor Day night. Labor Day night. That's weird. That's weird to say.
I don't.
The night of Labor Day.
Yeah, it's Labor Day.
But it's at night. It's at night.
Labor Day after the sun sets. No?
Labor Day after dark.
I like that.
Sure.
Kind of like
Labor Day after dark.
Labor Day after dark.
The sun sets at Bill Armstrong.
Labor
really
Day under the lights, maybe? Or is that Bill under the lights?
That's Bill under the lights.
It's Bill under the
All
lights.
right, regardless, it's an 8 o'clock match Monday. Of course, the emotions are probably still going to be riding very high after the match tonight against Washington. How do you guys see this match playing out? Seton Hall has not conceded yet this season. Of course, we know what they've done in years past. The Big East, it feels like the top and the bottom, there's a distinct difference between them both. Seton Hall definitely towards the top. You think Georgetown, Seton Hall, Creighton, St. John, some of the best historical teams in the conference, and now you're adding Akron. How do you see this match panning out? And I guess a score prediction as well. Joe, you want to start?
I think this is going to be Indiana's first loss of the season.
Interesting.
Think about what they're coming off of on Friday. Tonight. The big game, Washington. All the emotions in the world. You see it happen a lot of times in sports. You got the huge game and the quick turnaround. There you go.
Trap game.
Yeah, it's a trap game. You use all your energy and emotion into this game, and you almost forget that in 3 days recovery time. I mean, 2 days of recovery and then game day, you have another game. And I don't know. This DePaul defense is very strong. They've showcased it in the first 2 games. They play in a very good league. They're at the top of that league, like you said. That's going to be very competitive once conference play arrives. And I just think it's going to be a 1-0 game where Seton Hall's able to take care of business.
Nick?
Going back to Joe's point about following up big games, I want to go back to Indiana basketball's victory in West Lafayette earlier this year. I guess it was
Is it too early to talk Indiana basketball?
Wow, it is. Is September 1st.
The reason I bring that up is because Indiana followed that huge win with a lopsided loss at home to Iowa in a game that they never really were in. I think a similar thing will happen here because, again, you get so jacked up on emotions in one game that sometimes you just completely empty the tank, and then after a quick turnaround, you have nothing left. So I do think that Indiana, will fall in this game. I think it'll be a 2-0 loss. I just think that the offense is, kind of stagnant a little bit, maybe a little bit gassed, although I don't want to really speculate in that department. But I think just emptying the tank on a Friday night and then having to come back and play on a Monday night in front of a probably less packed crowd, a little bit more of a dead atmosphere. Not that it's going to be dead, but less energetic. I think that's the difference. And maybe Seton Hall scores early. Indiana gets on the back foot and just never really recovers. Yeah,
that's an interesting point. Seton Hall was kind of the same as Indiana last year. Really struggled in the regular season. They finished 7-4-7. 7 of those games being draws. 4-1-5 in conference play. 5 draws of the 10 matches they played. We've seen a lot of draws. Of course, last year was the first year where there was no extra time built in to college soccer. So, of course, that kind of changes the complexion of things. But they went on a big, some would say unexpected run to the College Cup. They knocked out some very interesting teams, I believe. Seton Hall was not in the College Cup. It was Creighton last year. I get the blue teams in the Big Ten, but they didn't make it to the NCAA tournament. They lost to New Hampshire, but it was kind of a disappointing season for them, and they're looking. But Seton Hall has been in the College Cup in previous years. You have a 1-0 loss.
Correct.
Joe?
That's what I said, 1-0 loss as well.
Actually, I think I said 2. A 2-0.
You said 2?
Yeah,
2-0 loss?
A goal early and then maybe something in garbage time.
Yeah, something like in the 75th minute.
That could lines up. I will say 1-1 draw. I'll go back to the draws here. I think no matter what happens, Indiana's going to be gassed. I think we know that. We understand that. And Seton Hall is a team that has given plenty of teams problems. If they sit back and kind of allow Indiana maybe beat themselves and try and hit them on the break, I think everyone's going to understand. I mean, both these teams have very similar recovery times. Of course, Seton Hall have a few more hours considering they played before IU tonight. But it'll be interesting to see what happened against Ohio State. Ohio State picked 3rd in the preseason poll by the Big Ten, and a team many people have expectations for. Yet again, they kind of came out of nowhere last year, I want to say, and put themselves in conversation to make a run in the Big Ten tournament and even the NCAA tournament, where they actually lost to UNC Greensboro before Indiana knocked them out. But I guess any final thoughts, fellas, as we, for the first time here, we're wrapping it up in this podcast studio.
Yeah, just one final thing about that game against Seton Hall. Just both teams obviously will be having that super short turnaround, so don't want to disregard the fact that Seton Hall is playing a game tonight and going to have to play a game on Monday. It's just the difference of the emotional factors is something that you can't really weigh. And I think that's going to be the biggest difference. And I think that will be a good benchmark for this team as they start to figure out their true form. And once Big Ten season comes along, I think you're going to start to see some of these guys really playing well. Alex Barger, Collins Oduro, those are 2 freshmen that, the league's going to have to watch out for.
Yeah, I think Barger's been a phenomenal presence. It seemed like every single time I looked up in the game against DePaul, he was getting touches. So I think Barger's another one to watch out for. We've mentioned Oduro quite a bit, but Barger is no slouch in that left back position, which I think is where he spent the majority of his time. But I think overall it's an exciting time to be following Indiana soccer because it's just like it just feels like they're so historically successful. Bill Armstrong Stadium's a phenomenal atmosphere. So if you can, head to the Bill, catch a match.
Well, that should do it here from our beautiful podcast studio in Franklin Hall. I think you guys heard my stomach just grumble.
Yeah.
I haven't had anything to eat this morning, so it's been kind of a lazy Friday for me.
I felt like a whale crossing or something like that.
clearly means that we got to wrap this up. So for my co-beat reporters, Joe Cronin and Nick Rodecap, we'll have content for you all weekend long and all season long. So please make sure to follow us on the Hoosier Network on social media and, of course, at thehoosiernetwork.com. But for everyone here, I'm Austin Platt saying so long. We will talk to you next week after Indiana's IU Credit Union Classic. Take care, everyone, and have a safe Labor Day weekend.